use, and you think about why, they're the perfect example of containers and why they make sense, right? So scalability, the elasticity of the cloud, of course. This allows them to scale up and down very easily, right, with their streaming platform. So it's a good example of, actually, can we go back one slide? Thank you. So that was a great example, right, of the industry adopting containers. Why? The vendor lock-in is another one. You know, when I first started working with containers back in 2018, a lot of our customers were doing this stuff on-prem, even though Twistlock was a cloud-native security tool. Containers, the portability of them, that's the beauty, right? Run them where you want, run them in other clouds, optimize your costs, allows you to freely move them around. You know, we talked about the deploying at scale. Docker was great for just, you know, what it was at the time, but as an organization scaled, Kubernetes, things like that came along, allows you to create, you know, replicas of your containers, expose them, you know, via load balance or something like that, all within, you know, these platforms. What's that? I'm not sure. There's 40 people. There's 40 people in the room, I feel like. Yeah. 5 minutes before? Okay, yeah. What time I have until? Okay, I've got plenty of time. I'll just try and think through what I have up there. One of the trends came about was DevOps, right? It was the new, more or less, way to manage the deployments of your applications, containers specifically, right? It's a different software development lifecycle than traditional, you know, applications being built. So continuous integration, continuous deployment. You know, I've got some of my customers build new containers and they're deployed into production on a daily basis, right? Rapidly deploying their applications. It also allows for easy testing. You know, if I'm running 10 replicas of this one image, I build a new one, I can slowly start to integrate this new image into my environment, see what the effects will be. So, you know, DevOps really became a big thing as containers started to be adopted. And then serverless has kind of still been around for a while, but right, just another abstraction. Right now, I'm not even concerned about, you know, the container and where I'm going to run it. I'm just going to provide some code, run this on Lambda, Fargate, you know, Cloud Run, something like that. All right, we can hit the next slide. So with some of those trends and what happened with containers, there were new concerns. Again, the software development lifecycle is different. It's a lot more rapid than what we were used to before. And so baking tools, putting security into those processes, you know, is a concern. I think we talked about this one on the last slide a little bit too, like visibility into what's there. Developers love to try new tools and new services within the cloud. And it's certainly easy to just pull images off the shelf. We talked about some of that too. And there's nothing wrong with that potentially. Why recreate something that already exists? But we want to know what's out there and what's in those images if you're bringing them into your environment, right? Which leads to the next thing, you know, third-party components and public repos, Docker Hub. Again, nothing wrong with using them, but I would want to know what's in those images if I'm going to run them in my environment, right? Is there some malware sitting within those images? Maybe it's not even set off to go until 30 days or something. You think you've scan this image. Did you sandbox it? You know, that's another step to take outside of just static scanning your images, is to put them into a sandbox and see what they will do, you know, when they actually run. We talked about some permissions with your containers, right? I mean, there's no reason to run a pod or a container as root if it doesn't need to be, or privileged, right? This will give you, or give an attacker, the potential to break out of that container, to own the entire host, all the containers, maybe even the cluster, depending on, you know, what some of those permissions look like. And again, the malware, again, static scanning will catch a lot of those things for known things. But what about if there's again, a script, it's going to run a curl command and pull that malware in, you know, 2 weeks later. So sandboxing, you know, catch some of those things as well. All right, next slide. So how do we start to secure, you know, our containerized environment? Shift left. We understand why we want to do these things, right? It's much easier to resolve a vulnerability in a piece of code than trying to go fix a vulnerability in 10 running containers. We talked about containers are immutable. Maybe it wasn't that way in the beginning. I had customers in the early days that thought they were going to exec into containers and run apt-get to resolve vulnerabilities. But obviously that doesn't scale. And so that's a remediation cost, right? I mean, that's not how it's going to work. It's going to cost too much for developers to go do that. Fix it one time, right? Different areas to integrate into the development lifecycle, all the way to, you know, the tools that your developer use, their IDE environment. So there's tools that'll work as a spell check, more or less, as they're creating that Docker file. Immediately tell them, hey, you're pulling in this package that contains these vulnerabilities. After that, right, they commit this Docker file to a code repository somewhere. There are tools that will also check that code, right, as it's being merged and pushed to your environment. And then after we have Docker files, we're going to build these artifacts, right? So we're going to use our CI/CD platforms, pull that Docker file, build an image. There are certain checks you should do at that point as well. Again, that's where you could sandbox your image as it's being built. We'll scan those images, vulnerabilities, compliance issues, and put control gates in place if you can, right? These are goals a lot of times for organizations, right? Developers are there to build faster, more efficient code. I like to say secure, but it's not always priority of a developer. So if an organization can put control gates in place to prevent vulnerable code from being merged up, you know, those are definitely goals to set. But bake that stuff in, because again, they are not, typically developers are not security centric. So we've got to educate and equip them on why it's important, right? It's better for the organization to do these things. Again, it's not just about building faster and more efficient applications, but secure applications should be at the forefront of, you know, what developers are building. And then equip them with the tools in their native tool chest, right? Integrate into the IDE, the version control systems, the CI/CD systems that they have. Developers want to live in those tools in their IDEs where they're comfortable with. So if we can provide them the information with those tools, you know, there's more of a likelihood that they will heed those recommendations. All right, next slide. Now that we've built these images, they passed our scans, we're going to push them to our repos that are out there, which would be our internal registries, if we want to call them those. They may be cloud hosted, ECR, ACR, whatever. We talked about other sources as well in the other, you know, in the other presentation. Again, there's nothing wrong with using images from Docker Hub. You just want to know what's in those images. We also touched on base images. This is one that I'm a big proponent of. A lot of more of the mature organizations I've worked with have teams dedicated to building those base images, right? And so they're providing their developers with golden images, if you will. We're more familiar with that from the VM level, but these are secure, hardened, patched, right? And now these images are given to the application owners to put their apps on top of those. Two different teams managing, you know, the base layer and then the applications themselves. We've pushed those images, they're sitting in our registries. It's important to continuously scan those, right? So maybe we built this image last week. It's passed all of our scans, but we all know vulnerabilities are found every day. And so if we're not continuously scanning those, you may be pulling what you thought were clean images into your environment that now contain, new vulnerabilities. So continuously scan those images. I think the other presenter even mentioned, clean up your repositories, right? If you've got 6 versions of this one image out there, there's probably no reason for that, right? You've updated it, it's more secure. Get those old images out your repos so they couldn't even be used. Access control, right? This applies to all things in security. Same thing with your image repos. Who can push and pull images, into those environments? Simple, but important to look at. Image signing is another way to kind of put trust around your images. So when they're built, you can create a signature alongside that image. And when that image is attempted to be pulled and run as a container, that signature is checked against that image to ensure that it's not been tampered with. So that's another method that you can use to ensure, the images that are coming into your environment are trusted and what you expect them to be. Next slide. So now we've pulled these images, now we have pods, containers, whatever we want to call those running instances of these images. There are ways for you to enforce trusted images. There are a few different ways, different tools that you can do it. You can do it with an admission controller. Right, this is an open source method with Kubernetes for you to control different types of things. So image attempts to be pulled. The Kube API is handling this request. It checks to see, is this image being pulled from one of your trusted registries? If not, the operation fails. Right, so there are ways for you to enforce these things as well. Once the image is running, it's trusted, it came from a trusted source. There are a few guardrails you maybe still want to put in place. Again, containers are purposely built, so it's pretty easy sometimes to create a rule or some type of policy that, we expect it to run 2 processes. Well, just whitelist those, and that's the only thing that are allowed to run, right? We wouldn't want to allow netcat or nmap or something like that, especially if we know it only runs 2 things. Outside of that, machine learning can be used to understand what your containers do, build a model around that, and anything outside of that would be anomalous behavior, right? So we see, maybe MongoDB is running on this container. It uses these ports, and all of a sudden one day we see something coming in on port 8080, right? It's never happened before, anomalous behavior. Maybe you alert on that types of behavior or stop that connection from happening, stop that process from launching. If it's a very, crown jewel, a very sensitive workload, maybe you even take that container down offline because you really suspect, an attack is going on. A couple of these acronyms, we talked about the CNAP earlier. That is the greater platform. So most of this stuff I've been talking about is what we call a CWP, Cloud Workload Protection. That's what Twistlock was primarily container security. And this is part of the greater platform. And a CNAP is the tool, or probably a Gartner term, I would imagine, that is out there for the consolidation of all these tools that are out there for cloud security. All right, next slide, and this is going to be it for me. Okay. It's just a wrap up anyways. So, we talked about the trends, containers coming up, widespread adoption, new software development lifecycle, new tools related to those, CI/CD, DevOps, Kubernetes, those types of things. The concerns with those, right? We've got to learn these new tools. We have to figure out how to secure them. We have to educate our teams. And then how do we start to secure, in these different areas? Because one of them is not enough, right? We can shift left, we can scan the images as they're being built. But again, new vulnerabilities get found in runtime or at rest, those images will have vulnerabilities that are found. But it always has to be, multi-pronged effect or strategy. And then again, a CNAPP is what you would be looking at, a cloud native application protection platform, really going to give you code to cloud visibility. So container running, it has a vulnerability. Here's the image repository. Here's the version control system where that Docker file lives at, allowing you to visualize and see the source of those issues before they become an actual, vulnerability sitting out on your network. I think that's it. I kind of rushed through it, but that's it. Any questions? Any questions? I know we covered a lot of the same things. You go ahead. So I don't know much about the firewalls, this specifically with Prisma Cloud. I know they're, yep. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so with AI, we're learning it more in terms of this data. That's what we use for building business. You know, it happens.
We'd have to check on that again. I'm not sure. Yeah. Come find us after the talk. We've got some other people with Palo here that could answer that for you.
Repeat that question. Repeat the question that you have in mind.
Okay.
Yes. Overall objective. So love this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you.
So my question is, if you're running a program, you're looking for a source of truth for the inventory of pipeline, runtime combination. What do you look for? Start to think about asset management and this kind of.
I think it's all of those. I think it's all three of those, but I think where I always like to start is this shifting left. Get visibility into the source of all the images that will be built and run.
Good. Here's running with code level. What's the best way?
I think you get the most out of it. Baking that in early will reduce, your risk at runtime. I have seen other customers do things differently where they know they have mission critical applications, and Twistlock does have an agent that can stop these attacks from happening. But it's a lot to undertake all those things at once, right? So it's usually a phased approach we would like to take. Start scanning images as they're being built. It's kind of a good starting place, I feel like.
In terms of just a follow on then.
Yeah.
In terms of a good, I guess, way to kind of have that lineage, that traceability. You have the code, then the code's effectively running in some sort of environment.
Yeah.
How do you build that connective tissue? Like as you mature, as you're describing?
Yeah. Metadata tagging. I think tags, so simple to tag things, but so powerful, right? And we can see who the application owner is, what environment it may run in, and those tags follow, right, from the dev cycle to runtime. So it's easy. We were talking vulnerability management back there. We've got this running container out there. It has vulnerabilities, but who owns this, image? Who's the application owner? So I've been a proponent of tagging for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Bill, you're up.
Okay, we're going to move right into the next presentation with Chris Lindsey. There you go. Thank you.
All right, I've got a lot to go through, so let me get started. My name is Chris Lindsey, and let me share my background because that will really feed into what I'm about to talk about. And we'll start with that. So I wrote software for 35 years. Out of the 35 years, 30 of it was writing for healthcare. So having to be secure was absolutely vital. The last application I was in charge of, I ran for 7 years, was a medication prescribing system. You screw up, somebody dies. Pure and simple, no stress. I went on to running and building an application security program for a multi-billion-dollar company, built it from the ground up, was very successful. So what I did is today's presentation is actually a bit of dev, a bit of security, and kind of the blending of the two. So I like to actually ask people, and I do a lot of interaction. Show of hands, how many of you guys are developers? 1. We have 2 developers. Okay, 3. Security guys. So I assume the rest of you guys are security. Hands. Come on, play along. All right, well, let's get rolling. All right, I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I post 3 to 4 times a week, and I do a podcast. Take a look because it's all good information, no sales. Next slide, please. All right, so developers cost too much money to spend time manually updating dependencies, said no one who's ever been compromised. Next, please. All righty, with that, 2023, 71% of the enterprises are running open source software. I mean, really, at this point, you just look at it and you say, okay, so we're running open source, we're fighting fires, we're at this point, we're reactive because the developer mentality back in the day was you do manual updates. I'm going to talk a lot about automation today, so I'm kind of jumping because I have a lot to share. So anyway, so 71% of the enterprises admitted their programs were reactive, playing catch up. So basically, when you get compromised, that's when you do something about it. Next, please. All right, so reactive state, what does this look like, right? So 71% is a terrible number. So 70% of the organizations have directly encountered one serious security incident over the last 12 months. Think about that, 70%. That's pretty much everybody. Some degree, data loss, full ransomware, everything in between. Data breaches, 78% increase from 2022, and I would actually say that's a little higher with APIs lately. Attacks have made the application security a board level. So basically now your security board is actually being a little bit, or your board of directors are now starting to be more active in security because you're seeing it in the news more and more frequently. Next slide. So how did we get here? So 52% of the companies say they can effectively remediate a critical vulnerability. So think about this. If a critical vulnerability, we'll just use Log4j because everybody knows this. Log4j happened. How quickly can you turn on a dime and actually attend to your Log4j? Some people are so far behind that trying to take the update is going to be painful and a tedious process. So it's going to take time and a lot of effort. 44% of practitioners agree with that. So the practitioners are saying that's very true from a practitioner standpoint. They're constantly putting out AppSec fires. So how many of you guys are practicing directors for programs? Okay, a few of you guys. So how often do you get those emails from systems or people calling, or even the tedious customer that reaches in and says, hey, I found something, or I found my data floating around on the internet? That happens way too much. So tech debt incurs interest. The bill will become due at some point. So the problem is the developers are doing what they do. They develop. And when they grab a library or they grab something, I mean, honestly, I was this way back in the early 2000s. I needed a file upload. I found a great library that was out there. I plugged it in, I ran with it. Who knew about directory traversal back in the early 2000s? Few of us did, but not too many. So people would upload things and put it into different folders and then execute them. Great. So now we actually got to do something about it. And so we would always typically, back in the old days, would typically say, all right, well, let's just take a week or two a year and make sure everything's updated, because, staying consistent was not on the agenda. We had more things to do. Next, please. All right, so reactive state, right? So developer teams. So what leads AppSec programs to be stuck in a reactive mode? Well, 89% of the code bases contained open source software that was 4 years out of date. That's a high number. So let me share something. I was at Developer Week this year, early, And I went from booth to booth and I was just chatting with the developers. And I jokingly would ask them, how many of you guys have dependencies out of date? And the suckers were unfortunately developers that were running the booths and we were speaking the right language and they admitted it. Then I would also joke, well, how many of you guys are actually doing stuff that has 4 years or older on your dependencies? Because at this point, we broke the ice. They know I'm a developer. They admitted it. So that number is true. That's the scary part. All right, you have alert fatigue. Those who run programs, how many of those emails do you get? How many times do you get paged out from the SOC? How many times do you get notified something's going on? It's just a constant barrage of alerts. So alert fatigue is causing developers not to remediate because the problem is you run your security tools and what they produce, a lot of reports, a lot of stuff, a lot of noise. Security teams, if you don't know how to work with the developers, if you're not a developer, you're going to take that information, you're going to push it over the wall and give it to them. They're going to look at you and go, wow, 3,000 fines. I will share this with when I ran my program. We took an update and the new update for our scanning tool for SAST included new definitions. And all of a sudden we had a team that had 4,000 fines. And I looked at this and I said, oh, this is bad. If I hand it off to the developers, guess what? They're going to tell me to go away. Being nice. But I looked at it and the vast majority of these were false positives. Most security teams that don't know or have a developer on board don't know the difference. You pass those 4,000 across, the developers get pissed off at you, security gets pissed off, and now you're basically dead in the water. You have a developer on board, or if you don't, bring a developer over, spend a couple of days with you, helping you look at the results, make sure they're positive, then pass them across. Because when you do that, they work together with you guys. So it's a constant barrage. So it's important. So 88% of CISOs, alert fatigue is causing developers is absolutely true, probably higher. Next. Okay, so security team. So let's flip to the security side. All right, 65% of the fragmented security infrastructure impedes response. What does that mean? Well, that means you guys are running a lot of different tools that are in many different places, producing many different results, and you don't have the ability to actually see the big picture. You see all these puddles of problems, but you don't have the ability to see it all together. I'm just going to share, find a good ASPM, tie it together because that is your friend. Okay, so no visibility into what matters because you have all this stuff everywhere, and how are you going to prioritize something if it's showing up on your SAST results, if it's showing up on your DAST results, if you have internal pen testing and you're finding all this information, guess what? Now you have the ability to do something and you can also prioritize and focus in. But if you have all these buckets of random stuff, you're not going to be able to put it all together. Because how do you prioritize something if you have 5 criticals strewn across all these different tools? DAST is saying this. SAST is saying that. Which one's more important? SCA is showing something else. So you just have all this stuff everywhere. So how easy is it to put this all together? Well, hey, we just acquired a new company. Now we got to go through and hook all this stuff up. You're never going to hit 100% coverage because it's just too painful to do. Too much manual labor. Next. So again, recap, 88% of CISO say developers aren't remediating their critical vulnerabilities because of alert fatigue. 89% of the code base has contained open source software more than 4 years. What do? Get off the compliance hamster wheel. Start managing your AppSec posture. Well, how do you do that? All right, so you're acquiring companies, you're doing everything. How do you do it? Next. All right, key strategies. And see, the thing is see, where I work, Mend, we don't do all this. So see, it's not a sales pitch. SCA, software composite analysis, is your dependencies that are out there. So when you're grabbing libraries, SCA tools will tell you the library you're using, does it have vulnerabilities? Or indirect dependencies, like if you have 3 or 4 layers down, because a lot of open source still uses other open source. SAST looks at your source code. Does it look like SQL injection? Does it look like cross-site script injection? You get a lot of great data with SAST, but you also get a lot of false positives. Well, is there really such a thing as a false positive? And the answer is actually no. And I actually had somebody explain this to me in a way that actually changed my mentality. A SAST scanner is designed to go find something. It finds it. The question is it relevant to you? And that's the difference between a false positive and a real positive that doesn't matter. And so the thing is they actually convinced me to change my mentality, because I was always angry and pissed off at my vendor for all the crap that they were making me chase. DAST is amazing when it's connected. It's heavy to do, but DAST will get you a lot of great information. DAST will tell you, I actually found these, like an automated pen test. And when you actually throw AI stuff into it, I'm going to speak at LASCON next week, and I'm really going to be heavy on AI. So if you're at LASCON, come watch it. But DAST, when you start putting AI-enabled technology behind it, oh my gosh, it's great, because it finds something and then it digs deep, and it's all automatic. Container security, we've kind of hit upon it here. I'll throw my 2 cents in and then we'll move on. Find a container, grab it, pull it down, scan it, make sure that it's good and it's clean, put it in a sandbox for 2 weeks, play with it there. During that time, after 2 weeks, if the container still shows clean and everything looks good and nobody's griping that something's been compromised, move it to an internal resource, point against that. Don't go anywhere else. Don't point outside, just point to that, because you've deemed it clean, the golden image. We've already talked enough, so I won't go. API security. API security, here's a quick story. I was at AWS reInvent. I had this guy walk in and say, hey, who's Mend? And I would explain, and he goes, I don't need you guys, I'll write clean code. So I said, great. Well, I have Burp Suite, which is penetration testing tool for most of you guys, you know that. And I said, come over to my laptop and I'll show you something. I just want to check something. I created 2 accounts, and then I proceeded to steal data from one account to the next right in front of him. And I said, you have API security problems, but guess what? It's clean code, so you should be able to find it fast. So the look on his face, he just seemed deflated, but his ego just filled the whole room. So, but API security is really key, because if you think about it, I posted on LinkedIn 15 years of never being compromised. And the reality is, if you validate everything and treat everything as absolutely dirty walking in the door, and if something does not smell good, right? If you have a field that has 15 characters and they exceed the 15 characters, throw it all out. Log it, throw it out. Don't try to fix it. Too many people fix their API data. And the problem is if it's not right, why is it not right? Because the UI and everything should be providing the right stuff. Don't fix it, throw it out, because it's malicious. And when you log it, encrypt the data, so you store all the data with it, so you know what's being asked and what's being passed, because then you can actually do something about it. Log the IP address, because when you log the IP address, now you can say, guess what? This user should be logging in from Georgia, but they're actually logging in right now from California, 15 minutes apart. Something's not right. And so just when you're looking at API security, just validate everything, do the right thing. And that's really on the developer side, because there's so many things that you can do that you don't really need a tool for. Next slide. All right, proactive state. Let's talk developers. So what can we do? Well, you can automate your dependency updates. Well, what does that look like? There are open source tools, and I'm going to hit on Renovate, which is a free one that's out there. It's free to use, free to download. It's a community edition. And the beautiful thing about it is, and it's just one of many tools. So there's other tools that do this, but when a new version comes out, if you're running, let's say jQuery 1, well, let's just use Log4j, since we used that earlier. 1.15 comes out because that's the hot fix. And then 1.16 comes out, and then 1.17, and then 1.17.1 and .2, because you guys know that that's what happened when it all hit. But the reality is, if you have the right tool, what's going to happen is it will automatically create the pull request to update. And some tools, and I know Renovate does this, they'll actually tell you what's called a merge confidence. A high confidence means that you have minimal code changes to actually implement this. So you can almost slide it in. Guess what? That's low-hanging fruit. But if you have a low confidence, it means you're going to have different you're going to have to actually do some coding and something behind it. It's free, it's on GitHub, and I'll hit on it a little bit more. And a spotlight experience, right? So one of the things that you want to do is make sure that you're bringing all your vulnerabilities into like an ASPM or some kind of system that you can actually see it all together. Because when you see that this issue, this critical vulnerability spans into other things, now you can identify root cause much quicker than chasing down that one piece, because there could be a bigger thing. And guess what? It could be mitigated through a WAF or other technologies, so it may not have to require any coding. So that's important. Next. All right, so automated dependency updates for Innovate. At the time that I wrote the slide, it had actually 1.3, but now I think it's 1.7-ish billion downloads. Again, it's free. The scans your repos to detect dependencies. It does automatic pull requests. It provides that merge confidence and everything. It even includes private packages. So if you're writing stuff internally, you can point to it and see that your internal stuff has updates. Next. Spotlight. So repo-centric approach. So run everything where the developers live. What I mean by that is developers live in GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, some kind of source code management tool. A lot of the tools, when you look at the automation, if you can plug in there, then guess what? Now you're not having to go configure all this stuff because you can do it on a more global scale. And guess what? That shadow AI group, our shadow group that just created something, that slipped it in and actually was good enough and smart enough to check it into a repository, it gets scanned automatically. You don't have to worry about it. It's already done for you. So automation's actually key for success. So think about where your developers live and try to put that in as part of your focus, because when you do that, you have that visibility, and it's day and night important. Gives you prioritization and gives you pull requests. Now you get all the information in one area. The developers don't have to go chasing 5 or 6 different logins. It's all together. And I'm not pointing out any tool. I'm just saying find the tools that work in these environments because it will help them. Next. So proactive state developer results. So when you have everything actually working, developers are going to be working on new technologies, new things. They're not focused on all the bug fixes because with the automation, it's just now part of the next release. Oh, guess what? 4 pull requests came in. We go ahead and we take them. We make sure QA is aware of the changes so that they're not going to go surprise. And they know to look for things. Developers are not afraid to have an open conversation. One of the things that was great is whenever in my program, we hit the point where people would actually call me and say, look, I'm writing a mobile app. What is the proper way to secure the mobile app? Because it's healthcare information. If I leave my phone at somebody's house and they have it unlocked, what kind of thing should I be considering for the mobile app? Well, guess what? A thumbprint is good enough and it's okay. So when you have that relationship with developers, now you get to a point where they're actually willing to reach out and talk to you about, hey, we're doing something, and bringing security as part of the design process. So it's all working together. Your technical debt is much lower. Developers hate technical debt. If you tell a developer you got a lot of technical debt, they get angry at you. Security has technical debt, but when you actually work together, it brings it down. Your 0-day vulnerabilities can be addressed quickly. So I'm going to share Log4j. I was scanning 2.9 billion lines of code per month to tell you the size of my program. When Log4j happened, I was on a call with a new acquisition, sharing to their developers what we did on the security program. Because I believe in the transparency model. If you're being transparent, they're going to buy in. And so when I had my transparency and I was talking to them, I had a little window because I was monitoring Twitter at the time, going, hey, look, something big's happening with Log4j. I should be aware of it. After I got done with that call, I called all my architects together and said, we have a problem. And I know that it's Java, and I know what my blast radius is. And at that moment, we hit the ground running. In less than 12 hours, we were 100% mitigated across the entire enterprise. When you have your information at your fingertips that you can grab, you will be successful. But if you have to go to all 30 of these applications providing you data, you're not going to be successful. That's why automation's key. Next, please. Security teams. I'm not going to give up on you guys because you need that holistic view. When you've got it, guess what? Back to my Log4j, you have it all together. You have the visibility into what matters because now you have all of it. Developers have it all within their source code management tools. And from a security standpoint, you've got all the information feeding into like an ASPM or some kind of system that brings you that nice holistic view. Next, please. All right, so control and visibility, just kind of recap. Centralized scan configurations, put something together where you can do it centralized, where developers can't bypass. There are some good tools out there that allow you to do that. That means that the groups that try to bypass because they have too many problems can't. So that's important to do. Do prioritization. Find a tool that will actually allow you to key in some of your information for the CVSS scoring. Because you know what? I can tell you that your score is 9.8, but what defines the 9.8? If you can define, great example, command execution issue. If it's on a command line utility, doesn't matter because you're already on the command line prompt, but it does if it's on a web page, a website, web server, backend. Command execution's terrible, but if it's on a command line utility, it doesn't matter. So that perspective is absolutely key. And then find something that has APIs. Make sure that you can integrate into it, into your existing process, and automate the crap out of it because I built my own endpoint receivers for GitHub and Bitbucket back in the day when I ran my program. And when I onboarded a new application, a new acquisition, I could do the whole tie-in less than 4 hours because my automation would tie in at night and go add all the webhooks to all the new things that we just acquired, tie in, and then scans happen. And within a couple of days, I have that visibility. So nearly 100% with 4 hours of my time. Next. Flexibility. Make sure you have an architecture that has no limits. Make sure that you can do as many scans. 2.9 billion lines of code. If I was paying per scan, a lot of the stuff that AWS was trying to get me to take on would have run me over $10 million a month. So make sure that you have something. You have your own hardware on-prem. I'd almost recommend using some of that because when you can do that kind of loads, now you're not having to pay for compute because it's all on-prem. Global repository configuration for the win. If you can do that, that means anybody that tries to put something new in, you've got it. And there were multiple groups that I found that were from non-IT groups that were actually writing their own software. And I'd come across these when I was doing my edge scans. And when I found these and brought their stuff in, they were absolutely terrible. And just so you know, Gen AI is wrong 52% of the time. And if you ask Gen AI to write you a nice endpoint in C#, it will. And then you ask it, is it secure? And it will say, oh, no, it's not, even though it just generated it for you. And then you turn around and you say, well, make it secure for me. And it will. And it goes, yeah, we're good and clean. Then you pass that into a security scan tool and you'll still find things. So your developers who are using Gen AI to rapidly create code, just be aware of that because that is a potential pitfall. Next, please. All right, so proactive state, security team. So developers communicate with you. They ask you for advice. The security team knows the current risk. The other thing that I did that was very vital for my program success, I took and built reports that went automatically up to the executive board. All the way into the CISO and the board, they knew the risk across our entire company, and it was a massive size company. Management knows the security metrics, so everybody's aware. Guess what this does? You're struggling to sell ROI on your security tools. Guess what? This does it for you. Now they can see that the tools are actually providing the value that you need. So the budget's always going to be there. Vulnerabilities are known, so you can actually plan and work with it accordingly. And your time to remediate findings are much faster because you have all the information you need. And 0 days are no longer as much of a problem, unless it's a hard change that requires a lot of coding, which still easily can happen. Next, please. So if you're updating dependencies, it's like going to the dentist. If you only do it every few years, it's going to hurt. So true. All right, developer experience. I'll blow through this really quick because I know I'm getting short on time. All right, so developers are comfortable with technologies they're accustomed to. If you ask a developer, go create something for me, They're going to use the tools and everything they're familiar with. They're not going to go out and say, oh, I want to go do this in Objective-C, or I should go do this in Go, or I should go. They're going to do it in what they're familiar with because they know they need to throw it together quick. And so the thing is just make a good developer experience for them. Let them work in the environment that they're good with, but make sure that you have everything configured so it's included. Developers do what developers do. Keep them in their natural habitat. Keep them in their source code management tools. Keep them in the things that they use and love. Because if you have to go send them off to go do all this stuff, they're not. And developers are better focused on getting the job done, and they're more productive when you're not having to jump around all the time. I do something called a fix campaign. I wrote about it on LinkedIn. A fix campaign is essentially after you hit a certain point, let's say 6 months, take a week off after the next release, have security team come in, sit down with you guys, share out all the findings. Don't do any new development outside of these vulnerability fixes. In a week, you're going to knock out the vast majority of them. You run them all through a full 100% regression through QA. And guess what? You just put a massive positive dent in your security for the company. So think about that. That's a week, 2 weeks a year. And it's an easy to do. It's an easy ask. Next, holistic view. So when your security system looks like a puzzle, it's hard to get the big picture. Put something together that brings it together. All information in one place. That's where all the decisions are made, because when you have the full picture, you can make the right decisions. Decisions aren't partial information. It's just a partial solution. Prove me wrong. Arm your team with success. Having the right tools makes it easy. You can put on a roof on a house with a wrench, but you go a little bit quicker with a hammer. So having the right tools will actually get you in there. Having the actionable results. So when your security tool does say, hey, we have a finding, make sure there are actionable things before you go hand it off to the developers. Because you hand it off to the developers and it's not actionable, you've just now wasted their time. They've switched, they've pivoted off of what they're doing, and they're not going to like it. And giving developers what they need to ensure that security has a chance of success will guarantee success across the board. All right, a couple more slides and we're done. So percentage of developers, I'm not going to read this. Take a look. So essentially, when you're actually proactive, you're going to find the after is so much better. Percentage of developers using AppSec, if you don't have it in place properly, they're not going to think about AppSec, and you're going to be in a negative, bad spot. You're going to be in a much better spot. All right, next. All right, again, number of developers doesn't change. Security doesn't help the number of developers. It's always going to be, you have 400 developers, you're still going to have 400, but the focus is going to be so much better. The average time spent is actually going to be less because you have all the data information. When you know that a dependency is going to be time consuming, you can schedule that in. If you know that it's going to be easy to slip in, low hanging fruit, hit it. Next. All right, with that, I'm done. This is usually about a 45-minute to an hour, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found a lot of good stuff on here. If you have any questions after this, like I said, look me up on LinkedIn. I post and you can ask any question. Just think about it. It's recorded, so you can go back and do more. Do we have time for questions? Yeah. Questions? Are we good?
So, Chris, excellent presentation. A lot of companies take advantage of
The holidays for moratorium, for freezes, releases, and otherwise. Then you have this thaw, kind of hockey stick up of things you got to address. You have a perspective on like what that should maybe look like or look differently? Am I being clear?
No.
So some companies go through and they don't deal with some of the vulnerabilities, or they may freeze certain things so that when you get into a high peak period, say during the holidays, if you're in e-commerce or otherwise, you're not doing as much kind of vulnerability management at various levels.
Right.
And so when you want to kind of balance that, or you start to thaw out from those moratoriums or freezes, you have a perspective maybe of what that could look like?
You know, honestly, that would be the perfect time to think about the fix campaign, to slide it in. Because, I mean, we would have on our company, we would do those 3 or 4 week, freezes. 4 weeks going up to a major holiday where a lot of people are going to be off, like Christmas or some of the other ones. So this would be the perfect time to, try to slip in some of this. I know you can't push to production, but guess what you can do is during the freeze, you can do all this, have the next release ready to go, get it through QA, do all your staging, and then when the freeze thaws and it's now open, then you can actually do the push. And now you actually are still making your progression forward. The other thing too is when you do the fix campaign, make sure you treat it like a release. You get it out the door, because what happens is if you have a hot fix you need to make, you roll the stuff back, and usually rollbacks, you always lose stuff. I can't tell you a development team that doesn't suck at it, because they all suck to some degree. Because I can tell you, we ran into trouble with rollbacks all the time as a team. As good as we were, we always had trouble with rollbacks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Chris, we talked about integration for posture management where you have all your results in one place. Is it better to buy a solution like that from a vendor, or to customize it through bots and things like that to your needs, and have all those sources coming through bots and integrations into your own posture management database?
That's a great question. I think every company, it just depends. I mean, because budget plays a big role into that. The question is the big question for developers, buy versus build, right? A lot of times I was always I love to just build whenever possible, but in some cases buying is a great option as well. It really just depends, because think about it this way. If you're going to do bots and your own stuff, how long is it going to take you to ramp up and get to the point where you've got that coverage and you've got everything going? On the flip side, if you could find a package that fits your 70 to 80% of your needs, then you can go with something like that and still customize the other 20% to get the data in there. So then you have that visibility. Not all the applications out there or the scanning tools or the things will give you all the information you want, but a lot of those APIs give you a lot of access to that data. And then you can do a lot of manipulating, massaging to get it in there and be able to do more with it. So great question.
Comment on that?
Oh, thank you. Just a comment on that. I don't know if this is working. I'm very loud though, so it's okay. I work in the ASPM space, the vulnerability aggregation space, and I've worked with dozens of Fortune 500, 150s. Usually they build out a solution, and some of them have massive developer benches, and it's amazing what they can pull off. A lot of them see success for 2, 3, 4 years, and then eventually they have a hard time scaling. And I think it's just because of the amount of integrations you have to maintain, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it does very much depend. I've seen Amazon has this incredible home built program called Shepherd, I believe. Incredible. But other places, it's like after a few years, do we really want to have all the staff maintaining?
Well, and then, that maintenance, of it, I mean, it's heavy, because what happens when you find a bug in it?
Right.
Then you got to schedule it in. And what if your resources have been pulled out and working on other things? Or the guy who wrote it left.
Makes sense.
That happens too.
I'd be curious to ask you a question. Do you think that there's an appetite for finding solutions that can do the ASPM stuff and the scanning? Or do you think it makes sense to keep those divergent?
Oh, I've seen many of these questions on LinkedIn. It's a trap, as they would say in scholars. No, I will give you my personal opinion.
Yeah.
My personal opinion, I believe that you really should honestly have segmentation of duties. And the reason for that, with the separation of duties, is if I have scanners that work great for me, I should use those. I shouldn't have to go to a company's scanning system. If a company provides scanning as part of that, then the problem becomes is it gets a little bit dirty of a line. And what happens if you decide to leave that scanning tool and go for another tool? You have to ditch the whole thing. So when you have a segmented environment that allows you to get the best of breed, you may have stuff. I mean, the reality is you may not have the budget for the top shelf stuff. But if you have a good ASPM system in place, or something you built, or something that's tied there, and you can bring in good enough security for the others that your budget allows, and then grow and update those tools accordingly, then I think that gives you that environment for success. But yes, there are people out there that say that scanning has to be part of an ASPM system. My only comment is what if you don't like that scanning? Now what? So.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
Cool. Well, thank you guys. Again, find me on LinkedIn. You can see me here and ask questions. Thank you for your time.
Excellent job. Thanks to all our presenters today. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to do this AI security panel. So everybody relax, finish your food. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Right now. Yeah, trust me, he's gonna be taking roll. Started yet? I don't think it started yet.
And then there's no, like, mitigate all the vulnerability. Yeah.
Is that gonna work? I need something loud. Watch me break a plate. Let's get a rhythm going. Okay. We're going to get the security panel started now. So security panel participants, come on up. We're going to be sitting in here. Yeah, or standing, whichever. Yeah. And we're going to be sharing mics, right? We got another mic? We'll just kind of be spreading these mics out. So I want to, here, Eddie, you could take. I'll hold it. And
just pass it back.
Anyway, pass back and forth here. Brandon's going to be our facilitator today for the security panel.
Okay,
Oh my God, timer's going. We better get on it now.
we're gonna get on it. So we're gonna go ahead and get started, everybody. We have something very exciting and important to talk about. Our two favorite letters, A and I, right? With certain other things too here. So before I introduce our panelists, just want to kind of go over a couple of things here. First off, this is an awesome panel, lots of experience, and good Q&A will make the day. So feel free to interrupt us. We'd love to go deeper into any of the topics that you guys have. And, we're going to go on a little bit of a journey here. We're going to talk a little bit about this ultimate cat and mouse game when you think about it, right? Like, what is the cat? What is the mouse when you talk about securing and protecting AI? And so I know Chris tried to do this a little bit here, but my back was turned to everybody. So quick show of hands. Everybody hands up really quick. Everyone can put your hand up. Please do try. Okay, good. We got that part. It works. Are you a developer? Put your hand up. So we have 4 developers in OWASP, 5, 6, 7. Okay, we have developers here. Excellent. Hands up if you're a security practitioner. Okay, a lot more of that. Excellent. Okay. And then if you're just an enthusiast, you're just excited about this. Okay, we have a few of them over there too. Awesome. So great. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this whole journey, right? The fantasy science fiction becomes reality, right? When it comes to AI. We'll talk about some things that you should think about when securing it and building your program. And then we'll leave you on kind of a high note of just a couple things to think about as this comes up. But let me start off with a couple of statistics. Quoting McKinsey, right now, 66% of enterprise applications have some form of generative AI in it. So 2 out of every 3 apps currently have that. And that's expected, according to Gartner, to grow to 80% by 2026. All apps, regardless of industry and size, are going to have some form of generative AI. And so that's freaky when you think about it, right? It's there. And can you detect it, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off by introducing our panelists here. And starting off with myself, Brandon Pinzon. I'm a recovering CISO turned advisor. And so I have the benefit of helping companies build world-class risk management programs. And then I get to let us think out loud. So again, please do interrupt us with good Q&A. To my right is Ed Contreras. He's the Executive Vice President, CISO for Frost Bank. He has spent 22 years in the Army before working in private and public sectors and helping manage and helping lead teams in the financial services industry. He has extensive experience, and I'm glad that you're here to share it. Thank you, Ed. Next to him is Chris Lindsey, seasoned speaker. We heard a little bit about him. So he spent 35 years developing, last 15 years in security. And thank you so much for flying in for this. This is fantastic. So this is awesome. And so, you built teams, programming solutions, programming software, programming, especially in the healthcare industry. So my hat's off to you for doing that. Thanks again for coming back. And then to his right, we have Joe Gregorio, our president of OWASP. So he's the VP of Application Security for Frost Bank. He's responsible for securing Frost Bank's application program, and they're protecting over $55 billion in assets. So awesome. And also want to just call out, thank you for putting this room together, you and Brent. Excellent work. Just a quick round of applause for that. Excellent. So let's go ahead and get into it. When we start to think about dreams, right? You think of AI and science fiction, generative AI, we could think of Skynet, we could think of War of the Worlds, we could think of all sorts of types of things. And so, Ed, why don't you kind of start us off with this? Like, what keeps you up at night when you think about some of the generative AI things that we're working?
So I think one of the challenges with the two letters that we're all very familiar with is we all have different terms, different definitions, and different expectations of it. And it's for this room probably fairly seamless to talk about it. In other groups, it may be very difficult. In some, it's very theoretical. And so, when I go to a board meeting, when I talk to my executive team and we're talking about funding and how much money we want to put towards this, because we're told we have to put money towards this. Well, how much money per share do we dedicate towards artificial intelligence? Are we doing it the right way? Are they thinking they're going to get what they're supposed to get from it versus what we can actually deliver against it? And so when you say what keeps me up, right now it's making sure that what we can commit to and what we're funding is what they're expecting and what they're approving of. And that's not an always easy conversation. When you talk about the development team that's actually using it to either generate code, to validate functionality, that's a lot different than maybe what our contact center or our executives within our branches are looking at for artificial intelligence. Our employees may look at it as potentially taking their jobs from them. And so I have to be able to have that conversation with the executive team for investments, with our technical teams for capabilities, and being able to have that balance. And so, I don't know if it keeps me up at night, but it definitely keeps me thinking about how do I keep the conversation going, get it funded, and manage expectations.
I like that. And, just thinking about this through, you have the real responsibility of building that program and making sure that you're staying, ahead of what the attackers are doing, right? There's a defender's advantage. There's an attacker's perspective on this. And so I can appreciate that. And so, kind of going over to build off of this, Chris, what do you think about that? What keeps you up at night? You've got deep fake things. You've got all this generated code. What keeps you up at night?
Oh, where do I start? There's a lot that keeps me up at night related to regarding AI, because when I look at AI, I look at it from a red teaming perspective. I used to get in front of CISOs and we'd have a VIP dinner and we would talk. And I would always ask this question before AI was even something that was really up front. And my question was, technology has really progressed over the last 2 years. You have kids that I call it the Minecraft generation who are used to digging and digging and digging to find something until they find it. And then they dig deeper because they want to build something. And with AI, it does it for you automatically. When you look at the red teaming and you look at some of the technologies, most people know of Gemini, but do you guys know of Dark Gemini? Somebody took the Gemini model, removed every aspect of a guardrail, and you could ask it, create a bypass for a web application firewall in C# that does X, Y, and Z, and it builds it. It's right there. You give it its language, it does it in that language. And so when you look at the technologies and where where the advancements are, my big question is as practitioners to you guys, is this something you're looking at? Are you thinking about this? Because it's on the dark web for $35 a month. Pay somebody on your team to go play with it, because do it against your environment in a safe way so that you can turn around and protect against that. Because if you don't think that people aren't doing it, they are. And so what are you doing? That's one of the many things. And I'll share one more thing. Older folks, my father, people, because of voice, I do a lot of podcast recordings, and the tool that I have will actually take samples of my recordings. And if I fail to say something and I want to throw something in, it will actually inject it automatically for me. I just have to type it and it'll say it in my voice. And what's to say that I call up and I say, hey, I'm Eddie and I need to, I'm at a trade show and there's a thing on, I have a week. If I do it within a week, it's 10%. If I do it today or tomorrow. So you lose some of that urgency, but it's still there. Guess what? If keywords, have keywords for your family, have keywords for people internally, because if you have that keyword, then you know, is it real or not?
I love that. And, I see that you're mic'd up, so I'm not going to pass it all down that way. And so, you know, when I think about this too, your wild ideas can become reality, right? And so I think we talked a little bit about, depending on how you're, you know, aligning this to somewhere between, you know, leave the world behind and Skynet types of things. And so when you think about running an application security suite like you do, then what are the kinds of things that you're thinking about? What are the adversaries doing, and what keeps you up at night there?
Well, here's an example. One of the things that keeps me up at night is I used to work on the missile warning system for the United States. I used to do the programming for the missile warning system and do the testing at NORAD. And we had simulation programs to simulate real attacks. And I think about going back to the dark web here with all these tools available, how easy would it be to take something like that, figure out the encryption algorithms, talk to the satellites, and fake an attack. So, I mean, it get pretty bad. So I think we leverage this AI, right? We need to leverage it smartly. Because there's a lot of bad actors out there, right, that we need to defend against. Going back to AppSec itself, some of the things to think about from an AI perspective is, one is whether you want to move to AI or not, all the third-party products that you're using for AppSec are moving to AI in some way or another. We had one AI engine that I didn't even know about in one of our third-party products that started changing the severity levels of our vulnerabilities. I mean, why are all these the behavior changing? Well, we have a new AI engine in there, right? Think about it, application security from a Copilot perspective, right? Now you have developers who are using Copilot. As mentioned earlier, the code coming out of that is not secure. It's not assumed to be secure. So you have to apply the same level of standards and controls and make sure those are still being put on top of that code. Number two, now you've got all these application development teams. They're using these tools. That the code is coming at you at a much faster velocity. And now you've got to keep up with all that code, right? You've got to keep up with it. Three is who's accountable. How do you know what came from an AI engine, what came from the person, right? The developer, and who's accountable. So there needs to be eventually some way of tagging the AI developed code so you kind of know where it came from, and you can kind of track that into your metrics to see, is AI introducing more vulnerabilities than the developers were? Is it improving things? Is it making things worse? And in terms of accountability, it always has to go back to the developer and owner of that code, whether they got the code from an AI engine or not. You have to have accountability there. So those are some of the things that keep me up at night and relating it back to AppSec.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, you know, when I think of AppSec, right, we have commercial off the shelf, we have custom developed, you know, you still have supply chain, third-party risk types of matters you got to deal with. Seems like it's embedded. And so, you know, Ed, kind of going back to you to build off of that, you know, when you think about what supply chain means, or, you know, even how this could affect your supply chain, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is Joe never sleeps. I'm like, oh my God. It's really intense. Third parties, it's interesting. You know, every company here uses a third party to produce a ton of services for your company. We have a TPRM team that reports into our program. And they look at contracts and they try to say, okay, do we have the right language in the contract? And this is where the legal side of this really plays a significant part. If you go to a trade show, if you go to any of these conferences, you talk to vendors, they will tout AI to the nth degree. We can do AI. And then we get into the contract process and you realize they're not really doing AI. They haven't disclosed it. We asked if they have this process. Really, you know, you might start with artificial intelligence, and I think to your point, or, you know, Skynet, and then you realize it's actually just automation anywhere and they're doing bots. It's like, okay, there's a big difference between what you describe versus what you're contractually committed to. And so we use our third-party program now to do an inquiry with our vendors. And we have to come out of the gate and say, this is our definition of AI. Are you doing this? And then that really clears up the immediate conversation. But then we talk about what Chris talked about, which is about liability. Now that we know you're using AI, who's liable for the output of that? If we customize it, if we accept it the way it is, if it's functional and customer interacting, or is it really just being vetted? So we're looking at all those criterias in the contract. We're using the right language in there to be able to get that comfortable. I meet with our general counsel very often. And one of our team members in our TPRM team, she sits with them all day long looking at these contracts. And as soon as we see the word AI, that's an hour conversation. It's like 3 or 4 meetings until we get to the point where we're agreeing what's comfortable. But it's a risk. And if you don't have a process in place, it can be interpreted incorrectly. If you look at the recent CrowdStrike incident that occurred, they referenced in public articles the use of artificial intelligence. We know that they use AI in code generation. We know that they use AI in some of the deployment CI/CD pipelines, but in our limits of liability, they did not disclose that. And so therefore, from a contractual perspective, there was very limited things that you can do. And so it's really just understanding, okay, when it happens, you might have said at the beginning, but you go back to that contract and you realize it's something a lot different.
And I like that, it's building off of like, maybe controls that don't work, right? No, it's not a questionnaire that maybe would have caught some of these service disruption kinds of things. And so, just kind of out to the audience here. So like application security has been around for a while, right? What are some of the controls that are not working? Like, do we love? Yell them out, yell them out.
Go back a little bit. We're not talking about the other half, and that's our data, right? We're doing everything to secure our application, but really the applications are data. So what happens to our data, right? So if I put in the public ChatGPT, my data is part of the model. But if I'm using Copilot, Microsoft says you're part of the model. Well, I want the private model, but how do you know? And so that's what kept me up at night. It's like, what are you doing with my data? And how do I verify what you're doing with my data? And Eddie's point, oh, it's just machine learning. Like we use AI in our call center function. Wait, you said press Y, and so it said, oh, I want my account balance. So it just do it.
And I like that, right? Because data is so important. You think about an AI system, it's really an untrained model. The technology intersects with data, and then you have a trained model, right? So that's kind of the essence of what AI is, right? Or the AI system. And so thank you for adding that. I think what other types of things? I think that might be maybe identity and access management or something else, but just yell out, folks, any other controls that we don't like that's not working. What's not working? Feel like you want to say manual code review, right? I like that. Any others? With static code analysis? Anything else? Right? And so that's good. So we have a couple of things. Data, the hygiene of the data, manual code review. And so, kicking it back to you, Chris, let's build off of that. Like, what are some of the things that are not working that we need to consider? And how do we change some of that?
So one of the things that we're not considering is when we're getting our code, it was trained off of something like Stack Overflow or somebody else's GitHub repository. Not saying much, but Microsoft does have GitHub, and that stuff does get trained. And the thing to consider is licensing. One of the things that hasn't been brought up, what kind of licensing on the code? If the code was GPL, is it still GPL if it comes out of AI generated, from Copilot? If you're grabbing models and you're putting models into your own stuff, what kind of language around the licensing is there too? Because that makes everything. Last time I checked, there was well over 80 plus license types being associated to LLMs. And so really what's not working is when people are just grabbing things and running with it, there's so much more implications that are not being considered that really should be considered as part of this. I mean, I can go in all these different avenues, but really at the end of the day, okay, great. You grabbed it from Copilot, you used it, you used the GPL. Any of us in the room has some of us older folks remember Linksys back from the 80s, in early 90s, where their firmware was using an open source application that wasn't disclosed, wasn't licensed. And guess what? We now actually have access to that open, they had to open source their firmware because of it. And so could you fall into that trap with just grabbing something out of Copilot where you have to open source your application? There's a lot to it.
I like that. And that kind of goes into this idea of design maybe threat modeling or even some of the engineering aspects. And, you know, Joe, jump in here. Like, what does Copilot engineering look like? We've used that a couple times. Did they give you, they stole your mic, so I'm going to give it back. So think about that. Help us understand a little bit more. Looks like one over there. Beautiful. What
Yeah,
does
so if
engineering
you
look
you
like?
think
for you?
about shifting further left. I see an application for AI to think about all the back to requirements, right? How do you baseline, you got a new application, how do you baseline the security requirements for that application and know that you have the right security requirements, right? And that those security requirements are in line with your standards and your compliance and those different types of things. I see an application for AI there that, you know, to profile the application and tell you here's what these baseline security requirements could be. And then speaking of threat modeling, then feeding that knowledge, using that knowledge base to then feed the threat model for that application, automatically generate the interfaces, identify the threat agents, identify some of those risks, right? And so leveraging things like OWASP tools like ASVS, for example, to level those security requirements, feed them into the threat model, identify the risks, and kind of link it together. So I see a huge opportunity there for AI.
If you pass that over to Chris again, please, I want to build off of that a little bit more here. So, you know, I hear building accountability. I hear looking and understanding about like the origin of the provenance of the data. You know, Chris, I got from your talk, you know, when I think AI generates some sort of code, I think you shared a statistic like 52% of the time it's wrong.
52%
that.
it's wrong, yes.
So let's build off of that. Like, how do we fix some of these pipelines?
So as part of the process, really it's about, okay, if you're gonna have AI enabled, code generated, code going in, really you still need to stick to the fundamentals. And the fundamentals say if you know, Richard is a developer and he hands code in, you've seen your tech review it. Now you can maybe take a first pass through AI and see what kind of things it pops up. But the reality is you still need a human as part of this, because AI today will hallucinate. And if it just gets confused, it just spits something out. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when you look at some of the tools that are out there that are for the pipeline that could go in and say, hey, look, I found a problem with it, but I can fix it automatically in the pipeline because the AI goes, yeah, I can fix that. And it does. And it's all automated and it goes to the end. What then? It didn't have those eyes on it. It didn't have anything. And you look at the potential that your build server could be compromised and you don't realize it. You know, SolarWinds, you see what happened there with Russia. And so, you know, with AI, it can be very sneaky. It can do a lot of things, but really the big thing is go back to the fundamentals. What's happening today? Treat AI code as if a developer wrote it, and it's just got to be reviewed.
You can pass it over to Ed really quick.
Ed?
To your left, yes. Just building off that, because I think that was an excellent perspective here, because context matters, right? And one of the things that we were talking about preparing for this was this idea of personas and the importance of these personas, because you don't know what you're building for. Potentially it's the wrong persona, but that context and perspective matters. Can you maybe share a little bit more on that? Just kind of what we're thinking about?
Yeah, so when you think about using an LLM and you want to be able to receive output, you have to understand in what context you want to receive that output in. There's a couple of use cases that we did at our company that helped us really get some visuals around this. So if you're a developer who wants to create code and you say, you know, write me a code that is in Python that I can use on my online banking platform and that it allows the insertion of credit card data, and it's going to write you some really good code. You might have another developer on a different agile team who's working on the same exact project for you, ask something very similar, but say, write me a code where I can do 20 releases in the next 2 weeks. And I have to be able to do these releases with a peer review, and that peer review has to check off on my code at these timeframes. Well, your code is going to look a little bit different now. Same exact LLM, but now all of a sudden the LLM's thinking you're a different person asking. You might have somebody else come in and say, okay, write me another agile team. And I think in our bank, and I'm not sure, we're hovering right around 25 agile teams. All are working on something with a different lens and a different expectations, but they may be asking the same exact LLM and getting completely different results. And so you have to be able to interact with your LLM with the persona that you expect to use for your team, but also know that there are other personas out there that can get completely opposite code because they are looking at it with a different lens. And so thinking about personas and understanding how to interact, there has to be training going on with the developers to say, before you interact with the LLM, what persona are you going to be using? So we know how to counter check, like what Chris is talking about. When that peer review goes on, if your whole point of getting code out of that LLM is really about release time cycles and it's about commitments and having high number of commitments in your CI/CD pipeline, well, that's a lot different than your GRC team that's looking for PCI validation and they're looking for vulnerability corrections. So understanding personas and interactions with LLM, it's not the fun part of it, but it brings quality out of it. But it takes a lot of training. And I want to go back to what you said earlier, because I think that was really important. Using an LLM just in different browsers gives you different outputs. If you've signed the I don't know who, if you haven't been to the Houston Microsoft office yet for their whole AI venture, it's amazing. It's an amazing experience. Go out there and look what they do. What they don't tell you is all the requirements to get the functionality that they had. So just from a developer perspective, you think I can use AI to pull data out of my Teams platform, but you're not using Teams connected to your email or your SharePoint or your OneDrive, or someone's using Power BI out of the applets, and you're not. Every single one of those interactions will look different. And the reason is the data may not be sanitized. They may be using Edge as opposed to Chrome. They may be signed in on Edge, or another person's not even signed in on Edge. Each one of those has an impact on the output. So understanding those personas is really critical.
That's excellent. And all of this seems to keep boiling down to the data, right? You're only as good as the data, and a limiting factor to that. And Joe, I'd like you to kind of weigh in here, but before we do, quick show of hands again. How many have worked with, or your companies are working with Copilot? Quick show of hands. Or are intending to? How about Gemini? Interesting. How about personally? Have you experimented with ChatGPT or Gemini? Quick show of hands. A lot more in the room. So that's excellent, because again, how many feel like they've been trained on how to use it? That's excellent, right? Much less. So to me, that looks like opportunity. And so, Joe, let's kind of build off of that, because we've set the foundation, about kind of the scare tactics, what to start to begin to think about. But let's talk about, like, what does data protection look like? Because poisoning attacks are a thing, this idea of human in the loop or human in the middle type of thing. So, what are the challenges with protecting the AI models or the data that it intersects with? Can you offer perspective a little bit?
Well, I think earlier we mentioned having a single tenant, right, model where you know that you're keeping that data inside house when you're feeding it to the AI engine, right? That's one thing, because I wouldn't want that data. That's one of the things.
Data exfiltration is a big deal, right? Especially with those that are experimenting with it.
Right.
And so, any other thoughts in terms of like staging or sanitizing types of data by chance? And that's because when I think about it, right, most organizations are really good at keeping data, but we get really challenged with throwing data away or having that life cycle. Have you come across that?
Right. And so actually Frost has, we think that's very important. We actually have a data governance team dedicated
Excellent.
to the whole data life cycle and make sure we have governance around the data. We also have a records management team when you talk about data retention and those types of things. So it's so important we've dedicated major parts of the organization to just focus on those things.
That's outstanding. And I think, we're building into that kind of what good looks like. So Chris, let's build off of that a little bit here. And so, what does good look like when you talk about AI risk management, some things there? Can you share a perspective?
So one of the things I want to throw as developers, one of the things, AI, when you're writing stuff to a database, it's so heavy to delete, but to flip a flag to say it's deleted data versus not, And I know that the open AIs and the Geminis are doing the same thing. Data deletion's too heavy. And so your data is still there, even if it's not typically or technically. And the models that you get too, you know, some of them do leak data out, communicate to the internet, even though they claim not to. And so with models, make sure you have a tool or something that can validate those models. Hugging Face and other places where you have registries to get models have things that will tell you, hey, this is, you know, the number of people have downloaded it and what kind of notes that people have come across, and if it's leaking data or doing things with it that are inappropriate. It's important to know. And you know, one of the things that you have is when you have AI in your environment, you may not realize how much AI you actually have in your environment. And we did a study with a couple of really large companies where we took a look at their applications and were able to identify AI models and things that were actually being used that they had no idea. And it, you know, the company thought it was about 20-25%. And we actually found that it was closer to 75-80%. And so these are some very, very large enterprises. And, you know, it's something just to be aware of, because people grab stuff and just run with it, and you don't realize it. And I'm trying to remember if it was Sony PlayStation 5, but one of their devs uploaded all the source code and was like, hey, optimize this for me. And, you know, they had to do a lot of manipulation with the lawyers and working with them to find a way to get rid of that, because again,
What could possibly go wrong?
oh yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
Well, no, thank you for that perspective. And so, you know, Ed, just kind of building off of that, you know, when you think about the technology, but the technology intersection with data, I think of, you know, what gets companies in trouble is personal data and this privacy concern that kind of builds in, you know, some ethical or usability considerations. And can you maybe share a perspective? What does good look like when you were protecting that data or protecting that personal data?
Yeah, so we do a lot of analysis on recent breaches. If you look at the fine that Capital One received, the fine wasn't because they got breached or they had inadequate, you know, development process. It's because they stored the data too long. I think it was an $80 million fine, and it was because they had credit card applicants from like 10 years or 15 years, before the breach actually occurred. And a lot of the applicants were denied, so they weren't even customers of Cap One. And so there was a fine because they had essentially extended the life of data that they shouldn't have extended. Also looking at there was a company that just got ransomware, and in the investigative firm, when they came in to look at what happened with their ransomware, they pulled their audit logs for their AI platform. They realized they were using AI. Well, when they got breached, the hacker actually used their own AI to query their own data sets to figure out where sensitive, because they were doing data mapping like you're supposed to do. They're doing data tagging, classification. They were doing all the right things, and they used AI against it. So they knew what the policy was. They used AI to discover all the sensitive data, and that's what they encrypted. So they actually targeted the data the company cared about based on their own data classification schemes and their own data cataloging. And so when you think about those types of things, the FCS just put out some guidance as of the 16th of this month, which is what types of controls do you need to place if you are using AI. Now, while it's directed toward the financial industry, I think every company can benefit from that. While not every company is a bank, banks are typically the most regulated companies out there. And so if this is guidance that is given to a bank, it's going to be able to be used at any company. But they'll tell you, redo your risk assessments. They'll tell you not only to redo your risk assessments, reevaluate your controls and your tagging. They also talk about what audit logs are available for AI interactions, who's reviewing those logs. But one interesting thing in there, and we talked about this a little bit, is reevaluate your development process. And it's really interesting that that's a criteria. I mean, everything was really high level except for that one. It was very specific. And it's because they're looking at who has the most power to query the data and have access to that data. In most institutions, it is your developers. Not that the DBAs are not as critical, but applications know how to do that in mass, and they know how to do that with speed, where developers or DBAs are really about storage and about maintaining that environment. So if you look at that guidance, it's actually really good guidance, very complicated to do, It'll take time, but if you're going to learn from any sector, learn from the financial sector.
And passing that over to Chris, and thank you again for that. Let's build off of that, because I think we should continue to think about what good looks like. And so, what you described is the beautiful ultimate game of cat and mouse, right? Where the AI is effectively used against you, and you have to now detect that. And so, Chris, what are some other resources we could lean on or think about to kind of stay up to date?
Wow. There's a lot. So, some of the software vendors out there, Mend does it as well, is we have the ability to tell you about the models that are out there, what it's doing, sandboxing to be able to identify, if you're using this, is it leaking, is it doing something? As I mentioned before, to be able to identify, are people or groups using AI that you didn't even realize are using AI. There's really a lot more, some of the tools out there, doing code analysis, what could happen, what is happening. One of the things, when you were just speaking, that came to mind is, some of the early code that was written in the early 2000s is still alive. And some of the ways that teams would actually do reports, they actually had where you could even pass in the query in the URL to pull those reports, because, back in the day, they didn't think about these kind of things. And so, the data leakage is extremely easy when you find those, because then you can just run any query against it, throw a semicolon, and start truncating and doing other data things that you shouldn't be doing. But
Yeah. And let's build off of that, Joe, because I know one of the things that we were thinking about too, watermarking, toe tagging, potentially. Do you have a perspective on that, kind of what that would look like?
Well, actually, what I'd like to mention is a lot of what the controls you guys have been talking about, when you get back to LLMs, OWASP now has an LLM top 10. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make sure we present at that in one of the upcoming meetings. So when you talk about the different controls you should have in place when you're using LLMs, it has a top 10 list. Whether you're talking about sandboxing or all these other things, a lot of those things you mentioned in there.
That's excellent, right? Drink our own champagne, right? Represent the cap there. I love that. And so, other things that we should maybe consider, beyond the, I guess, governance. When I think of the governance pieces, which you pointed out, part of that's your partnerships, right? And so, what's a strong partnership that you need when you think of governance coming to the table in the time that we have here? Who comes to the table to help with this?
Well, I could say for Frost, our CIO, I think, is our biggest fan.
Okay.
We have an excellent partnership with IT and the CIO. We actually report up into the CRO, and so we have a partnership with IT through the CIO, and it's just a partnership and communication from the top down and the bottom up. We have lots of different communication venues, whether it's AI or anything else.
Sure.
Communication venues that we use to communicate metrics, communicate progress, to collaborate, and so forth. And so I encourage that. You've got to have those partnerships to be successful. When you have the CIO taking your metrics to the board and saying, "Wow, we're doing such a great job," right? That's where you want to be. Make the CIO look good, make the CRO look good. It's a partnership. And I think one of the future OWASP meeting topics will be on partnership. I think we could dedicate a whole meeting and have some stories, both negative and positive there, right?
Yeah.
Some stories where we've learned from that.
Yeah, to get in elbow to elbow together. That's
Right,
really
right.
important.
Yeah.
Let's pass it to Ed really quick. Let's build off of that. So, please. Sissa. Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Okay. Excellent. Other resources that people like out there. Ions is a great resource. Okay. Anything else? Anybody looked at the Databricks AI framework, protection framework? Strongly encourage that one.
I would say that.
Okay. Okay. The AI Bill of Rights and other things out there, right? Okay. Got it. So we have just a few minutes left here. And so, Ed, leave us with a little bit of a thought here. Good governance, good partnership. Then I want Chris to send us off into the future here with a quick thought. So really quick and briefly, what does that governance look like? Who's that strongest partner that you need to have?
Yeah, so it is really a family affair. And so, have a council put together with decision makers. Decision makers should not be your technologist. It should be across the organization, your general counsel, your risk organization, your marketing team, your HR team. You need different perspectives. Technology is how you deliver it, but what you're solving for really should be the business. And so if you start with that model in mind, the technology will always solve the problem. We're not afraid of that, but have the right business use cases.
I love that. Chris, with you flying all the way over here, I'd love for you to kind of give us a thought here about here into the future. What does it look like? Just 30 seconds. What does it look like? What are we talking about in a year?
It's amazing because, today's LLM engines are very linear, and they've come out with newer technology that can hit a certain point in the branch and say, hey, I think there's multiple options now. If you ask your AI how many R's are in strawberry, they struggle. Most of the time they're wrong, but the newer technologies will have multiple branches and be able to come back and say which one's the right answer and actually have the right answer. Things are progressing so fast in the AI world. Most people don't realize AI was not really on many people's radars until February of this year. I mean, you think about where we've gone from February to today and the pace we're moving. Just think about where we're going, what you have going on as a company, as a developer. Don't put your head in the sand because it's here. If you try to avoid it, you're going to get run over. But also be smart and wise and think about where technology is going and try to be there and be up with it, because if you can and stay there, you're going to be in a much better spot.
That's excellent. Look, everybody here has shared just a tremendous amount of experience, and they're great in their profession, but they're also great people. And I just want to end on just something that is a 2-word answer that's so important, especially a room like this. So Ed, just start us off. It's going to be very important. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
Okay, Chris, same question.
Star Trek.
Joe?
Star Wars, man.
Excellent. Look, I want to thank everybody for the questions.
Hold on. If you see my videos, you'll see R2D2 in the background too.
So you obviously have a bias on there.
I
So
go both ways.
I want to thank our panelists for a stimulating conversation. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of the time.
Right. Get the slides back up, I guess.
Okay.
The slides back up and we'll rock and roll. I think I closed that out earlier. Oh. Oh, yeah, there. Yeah, and you go to the next slide.
Start that one there.
There it is. The next. What's that? Oh no, yeah, go back. Go back to the previous one, yeah. And wait a minute, go back one more. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, go to the next slide, yeah, okay, that's good, okay. Put it in full screen mode.
Yep. I'm getting there.
All right, folks. We just have a few more slides and then we're going to wrap this up so we can go out on the patio and collaborate, finish our desserts. So in terms of topics for future meetings, I'd like to get everybody's inputs. This is some of the things we have so far. Adventures in Shift Left, presentations on best practices and lessons learned for shifting AppSec controls left. OWASP futures. OWASP has been doing a lot of new innovation, so we thought it might be good, like the OWASP LLM Top 10. They've got a lot of new tools, new standards, new guidelines are coming out with, maybe a session on that. Microservices security, we kind of got a little bit of that today, but maybe focused more in on microservices and what that means for AppSec. The challenges there. AI code generators, so talk more about a Copilot and these different code generators and what that means to the AppSec pipeline. Get more into that. Women in AppSec, what's going on industry-wide. As I mentioned earlier, maybe having one on collaboration and partnership for AppSec. And so with that, I'm going to throw it out to you guys. Other ideas for future themes? We want to make sure these themes are valuable to you.
I think that something important might be what he asked is who has been trained to do those things. Can be also introduced in fall in the future, how training is really important. Is really maybe
So-
adding the training part of there.
Okay, so one on maybe different training venues for AppSec?
Yeah. Yes. Good.
Different tools and training venues for AppSec? Okay, good. Anybody taking notes? I'll remember. I got it. Any others? Good. Keep the ideas coming. Yeah. AI futures and with some future possibilities, maybe some negative, some positive, what it means for the industry, kind of thinking ahead. 5, yeah, okay. $20 or $30 grand for a personal robot. So with those great ideas, our next meeting, we're planning a first quarter meeting going to be in January. Yeah, third Friday in January. So is there a particular one on here or one that we talked about that you'd prioritize? That this would be really cool for our January apps OWASP. OWASP futures. You want to continue OWASP futures? Maybe we can have someone from OWASP corporate even come and talk about some of the things we're doing. Yeah, OWASP future. Any other votes? The shift left, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe we could do a mix. Do some OWASP futures and then some shift left stuff. Keep it interesting. Mix it up. Okay, good. Next slide. Thank you very much. Next slide.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Now the fun part. Next slide. Well, we're going to be doing this as a attendance acknowledgement for those of you who apply for CPE credits. OWASP, as I said in my meetup thing, doesn't recognize it. But with this certificate, you should be able to go and apply and attach that, and they should say yes to it. That's what our experience has been, but we'll see how it works.
Yeah, it says the number of hours on it. That's all you really need.
All right, next one. Did that already? Next. What happened? What happened to this?
You forgot about the prizes, man. You gotta go back.
Where was it? Where was that slide?
It was it. You went past.
Okay,
Go back.
Go back to the very first.
Brandon sponsors. That's it. Brandon sponsors. You
Yeah,
gotta do
go
that.
back to the very first one where the sponsors were listed so I can recognize it.
All right.
That would be the slide 1.
Yeah.
All right. So guys, just wanted to know that again, just like the last two meetings, our sponsors is what makes this happen for us. They pay all the costs. And, you know, they provide all the prizes and things of that nature. So we really want to make sure that we recognize the wonderful work of our sponsors, Armor Code, specifically Palo. Palo was just amazing with their sponsorship, Safe and Walmart. And what's really kind of in Mend was one of the great speakers. Chris was just freaking amazing. Safe and Walmart just decided they want to just, even though they're not speaking, they decided they want to keep sponsoring OWASP and helping for that. So let's just make sure that you guys know these are the guys that are helping pay for these events, and we're continuing to do so. So with that said, I'm going to get on with the raffle here. Yeah, thank you. It's really good back there. So the first prize will be a Apple AirTag. If that's okay with you guys.
Wow.
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun. Let me see who this is. I gotta get my glasses on because I can't read. So I can't win. Exactly.
I'm not supposed to have one.
I'm doing a cruise in a couple of months and I need that. The last four, 6026. And you have to be present to win. We're not playing that game. 6026. Anybody? All right. I love it.
All right, Audie.
There you are.
Wow.
All right. The next one is going to be for the Android users. Samsung Air, smart tags. You gotta love that. You gotta, I'm not getting into that battle of Apple versus Android. I'm just gonna do both. All right. 5998. Who is that?
My
Wow.
gosh.
How fun.
Does this affect us two people
There
from
you go.
IT?
That's all right. No. And then we're gonna do a gamer keyboard. Those of you young enough, you'll love it. But not give it to your kids or whatever. But they'll be kind of fun. I'd love to have this actually. 5993. Or did I just call that one? No, I did something else. Who's 5993?
Somebody leave?
Next, I guess whoever it was, they left. All right, 6003. Oh, there you go.
Dismissed it?
Take that on the,
All right, Chris.
you can take that on the airplane. All right, moving on. This
Wow.
is going to be a Google Chromebook.
Wow.
So yeah, and then this is a laser finder, which I think is kind of cool. Which one of the sponsors brought that in? That's right, Sneak did that. I mean, this is cool. I want this one, but I can't win it wrong. All right, so let's do the Chromebook first. 6006. Oh, Zach, you always seem to win something. All right, and the last will be the rangefinder. If you don't want it, I'll take it. 6020. Do 6020. All right. Wow. Congratulations, sir. There you go. Have fun with that. All right, I think that concludes it. So after that, we're going to move out here to the happy hour. So just stay around, visit, and enjoy the afternoon. 2 free drinks. And if you guys want any more after that, you can buy them on your own. We're done. Thanks, Chrome. We're done. I got to get all it cleaned up. Uh-oh. Huh? I'm not sure if I did. Recording. Stop.